Okay, so we've got about 40 on the line now. So I might just kick things off as we have a pretty full schedule. A very quick kind of intro to myself. Many of you I may not have spoken to yet. I'm Emily. I've kicked off in the CitySwitch City of Sydney Program Manager role and Coordinator role a couple of months ago. So excited to be hosting this first event for CitySwitch. And before I jump any further, what I would like to do today is really importantly acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I pay my respect to elders, both past, present and future. And I would like also to acknowledge the Indigenous people of the many lands that you're all coming from today. And I can see that a few people have shared where they're coming from in the chat. So please go ahead and tell us which Indigenous land you're coming from today. That'd be great. So we have a pretty action-packed hour and 15 minutes today in our call to climate action event, presenting 3 solutions for business to take to play their role in climate action. We do have a number of speakers and quite a tight schedule. Just before we jump into that, there is some common, as I'd imagine you all know, common housekeeping. We are recording this. We will provide a copy of that recording later this afternoon or tomorrow. As you have been doing, please intro yourself in the chat. Use the chat function to comment as we go through, but we also have the Q&A function. So Q&A is the best place for your questions. And my colleague Ali from North Sydney Council will be monitoring the Q&A. So jump in there anytime throughout the presentations if you've got a question, but we will also hopefully have 10 minutes at the end to verbally answer some of those questions as well. So the agenda for today is on your screen. We're very fortunate today to have Dr. Andrew King from the University of Melbourne. He'll be kind of providing that bit of context on where we're at with the latest Ipcc report. He'll also be giving us a bit of an update on what's been happening in Glasgow at the COP26 convention. And Dr. Andrew King is actually a senior lecturer in climate science at the University of Melbourne and was also a contributor to the latest Ipcc report. So we're very lucky to have him with us today. The other solutions today will be presented by some familiar faces to you, hopefully, our CitySwitch program managers, Toby, Danny and Phil. And we're also very lucky to have some signatories on the line who are going to present some of their great work in 3 solutions. Number 1 being to go 100% renewables, number 2 to go carbon neutral, and number 3, Phil will be talking through how to set up a sustainability policy and strategy. So really quite a tight schedule. What I will do is just hand it straight over to Dr. Andrew King to give us a 10-15 minute intro into where we're at now as far as the climate change context.
Thank you, Emily. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Hi, everyone. Today, as Emily just said, I'm going to give a brief intro, just contextualizing where we're at in terms of the state of the climate, summarizing the Ipcc report that came out a couple of months ago now, and what's going on in Glasgow at COP26. So firstly, looking at the Ipcc report, it's very clear, obviously, that the Earth is warming and that the warming is unprecedented in many thousands of years. the IPCC report has, there have been previous IPCC reports which have said similar things, but the evidence has become stronger, and the links between extreme weather events and climate change have also become stronger. So in the most recent report, we're seeing stronger evidence of observed changes in lots of different types of climate extremes, including heat waves, heavy rainfall, droughts, and tropical cyclones. So we've seen that the Earth has warmed by just over 1 degree Celsius relative to pre-industrial levels. But we're going to see more warming over the next century, but how much more warming we see really depends on the emissions scenario. The IPCC uses 5 example emission scenarios, and none of them will perfectly match what actually happens in the real world, but they should give some idea of the type of climate changes we may experience over the next century. So we've got very high greenhouse gas emission scenarios where our carbon dioxide emissions keep rising. These are probably less likely to happen now, but with our current policies in place, we're on track at the moment for something akin to this yellow scenario here, where emissions slowly decline over the century. And if you add in our pledges that we've been hearing about in COP26, and if they become more ambitious, then hopefully we'll follow something more akin to these blue lines. All of these scenarios lead to further global temperature increase, but the less carbon we emit into the atmosphere, the less global warming we experience this century. It's really a fairly simple idea. And by the end of the century, there's a huge difference. If we stick to a medium to high emission scenario, then we have much more global warming than if we reduce our emissions and try and meet the Paris Climate Agreement. So what does that actually mean for us in Australia? Well, if we do continue to warm the planet, we're going to see worse heat waves. These are maps showing annual maximum temperature change. So this is the change in the hottest day at each location from now up to 1.5, 2, and 4 degrees global warming. You can see that the more we warm the planet, the hotter our heat waves get, and our land heats up a bit more than the ocean. But we're experiencing, and we're projected to experience more heat waves, both on land and in the ocean over the coming decades, especially if we don't reduce our emissions and limit global warming. Even though the oceans aren't warming as quickly, the ecosystems in the oceans are more finely attuned to a smaller range of temperatures. So warming causes a big stress, especially for coral reefs, which are already suffering at the current level of global warming. And if we have 2 or 3 degrees global warming, we'll lose our coral reefs. We also expect to see changes in rainfall. On the left, we've got just annual total rainfall, and we expect to see drying conditions where you've got the brown colours over southern Australia and the southwest particularly. And where you've got the green, you've got slight increasing annual rainfall, which is expected in the north. But if we look at really intense rainfall events, so like the maximum one-day heavy rainfall event, the heaviest rainfall that occurs in the year, we expect that to get wetter pretty much everywhere. So even in places where we don't have a projection of more rainfall, we expect more of the rainfall to occur in short, sharp bursts that can cause flooding. We expect to see some other changes in Australia's climate. So fire weather, for example, is already getting worse, and we've seen that recently with the Black Summer a couple of years ago now, and fire weather will deteriorate further. We expect to see changes in rainfall seasonality, so a further decline in cool season rainfall and winter rainfall, and also increasing risk of droughts. And with tropical cyclones, we expect their frequency to decline a bit, but their intensity to increase. So more intense tropical cyclones, but fewer tropical cyclones overall. We have more confidence in some projections than others. We have a lot of confidence that heat waves are going to get worse, whereas we have less confidence in say, the tropical cyclone changes. We also know that sea level will continue to rise over the coming century and beyond. Unfortunately, sea level rise is kind of a slow climate change response because the thermal expansion of the ocean and the melting of ice into the ocean takes place on longer timescales. So even if we reduce our emissions quite sharply, we will still see sea level rise for this century and beyond. And that will pose a big problem to our coastal areas. Obviously, sea level rise is worse if we emit more greenhouse gases and warm the planet further. And if we if we follow a really high greenhouse gas emission scenario, we could trigger tipping points, which essentially cause runaway climate change processes that rapidly increase sea level rise. So at the moment, we're obviously aiming to keep global warming to as low a level as possible. We're aiming to stick to the Paris Agreement and keep global warming below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, or preferably below 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. But we've gone through our carbon budget so quickly, we've burnt so much carbon already that we don't have much left that we can emit before we hit 1.5 or 2 degrees global warming. So at our current emissions rates, we have only about 11 years before we have emitted all the carbon it would take to warm the planet by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And there's uncertainty on that. If we take a more conservative approach and want to avoid global warming of 1.5 degrees and be quite sure that we have even less time to stop emitting carbon. So now I'm just going to talk for a minute or two about COP26. So obviously there's a lot of news about climate change at the moment with COP26. This is this annual meeting of nations, leaders and policymakers to try and get on top of climate change. And this Glasgow meeting is a major meeting because countries have been asked to revisit their pledges in response to the Paris Agreement. And we've seen a strengthening of pledges. So before the the COP started, if you added together all of the policies, we were looking at all the policies and the pledges, including the net zero emissions pledges. We were looking at about 2.2 degrees Celsius warming by the end of the century. And with the new pledges, including the reduced methane emissions pledge, the Indian net zero emissions pledge, we're actually now looking at 1.9 degrees global warming if all of the pledges are met. But we have this big gap between pledges and policy. So while the pledges add up to around 1.8 or 1.9 degrees of global warming, if you just look at the policies we have in place around the world, they don't actually get us down to these levels. We're actually looking at nearer 3 degrees global warming. And if we take into account the 2030 commitments and assume that they're met, but that net zero emissions isn't on the cards, then we're looking at almost 2.5 degrees global warming. So if we meet the pledges, we're on track to stay below 2 degrees global warming, but we're not really quite there yet with the policy and the action to back up the pledges. We need to actually get down to net zero emissions. We are going to be reliant on new technologies that haven't been proven on a large scale yet. So that's all I had to say. So I'll pass back to Emily.
Thanks so much for that, Andrew. That was super interesting and a really great way, I think, for us to kind of kick off and remind ourselves, you know, why we're here and what the issue is and what we kind of need to get moving. Is particularly that difference between the pledges that have been made and even those recent ones at COP26 that do give us a good chance, but they do need to be turned into real action and policies to actually make that difference. So thanks again for joining us and for kind of setting us up. I guess from there, the first solution that we are presenting today is to switch to 100% renewables. So that's over to you, Toby.
Yep. Give me. Does that work?
Yep, that's great.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, our first step is switching to renewables. To state the obvious, what is renewable energy? It's energy produced from using natural resources that never run out. That's solar, wind and hydro are the three most common, but there's other sources. That includes geothermal, it includes bioenergy, it includes tidal or wave energy. These three renewable energy generation sites are in Australia. You've got the Royale Solar Farm in the ACT, you've got Gordon Dam in Tasmania, and you've got the Crowlands Wind Farm in Victoria, which was part of the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project, a power purchase agreement that was led by City of Melbourne. So why switch to renewables? Well, it's one of the quickest and best ways to significantly reduce your carbon emissions. And if you go into a long-term contract, it can actually end up saving your organisation money as well. It supports the Australian renewable energy sector, and it signifies that your organisation is serious about reducing emissions. And it also meets one of your commitments as a CitySwitch signatory. So we'll start off with one of the first options for switching to renewables. If you're a small energy user, that is, you consume under 160 megawatt hours a year, you're considered a small market user, and the best option there is green power. It's renewable energy that's accredited through a national program run by state governments. It's offered by most energy retailers, and often it can just be added to your existing energy contract with your existing retailer. You may choose to change retailers in that process if you're going through a review of your existing contract, but often you can just add it to your existing contract. There's usually an additional cost for green power, but you might be able to seek a better deal by renegotiating your contract or negotiating a new contract with a new retailer. And the additional cost can be minimised or avoided by energy efficiency improvements elsewhere in your offices. To take that up, go to greenpower.gov.au or contact myself or your local CitySwitch program manager. For large energy users where you consume over 160 megawatt hours per year, you're considered a large market user. You may be able to contract for renewable energy with selected retailers. There are some out there that have renewable only plans that aren't necessarily green power to access existing renewable energy projects. You still also have access to green power options for large energy users. The Business Renewables Centre Australia can also provide some resources and support for large and very large energy users. If you go to the Green Power website or you go to the BRCA website, contact your program manager or your energy broker or retailer or the BRCA. And if you're a very large energy user and you consume over 5 gigawatt hours, which is 5,000 megawatt hours per year, you could consider a power purchase agreement direct with a renewable energy generator, which is generally a wind or solar farm. If you're a user with over 5 gigawatt hours, usually it would be about accessing available capacity from an existing renewable energy project. So one that was in development or had already been developed, but not all of the renewable energy had been assigned to a customer for that project. But if you're actually a very large consuming organisation, and likely this wouldn't just be your offices, would likely be other operations outside of your offices, and you're consuming over 10 gigawatt hours per year, you could negotiate for a new renewable energy project, either solely or going in conjunction with other organisations. And there are many examples of those sort of group buying approaches now. The Melbourne Renewable Energy Project, led by the City of Melbourne, was one of the first, but there are many around. The City of Sydney has done one, and they have been very effective ways of getting access to long-term contracts at low prices that support the renewable energy sector. And additionally, there are still green power options for those very large energy users. So you could check with the Green Power website, the Business Renewables Centre Australia, again, speak to your program manager or your energy broker or retailer. There is one final option, which is on-site renewables. It's available for all organisations, but there are some limitations of it, some caveats. It's really limited to if your organisation owns the building, or perhaps if you occupy all of the building and have a good negotiating relationship with your building owner. It obviously depends on whether or not there's an available roof resource. That can be quite limited in the central business district areas, but on the city fringe and those areas outside of the CBDs, there can be quite good roof resources on buildings, on commercial buildings, on office buildings. If you don't have a battery on site, then you'll still need to be purchasing energy from the grid, and you can still use those other sources of renewable energy that I've mentioned, including green power, for that remaining grid energy. Now, I'm going to hand over to Ros Morgan from the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation Vic branch, and she's going to provide a case study of what the ANMF have done.
Sorry, I just had to get my window up. So thank you very much to CitySwitch for running this event and for the opportunity to share our story. So a little bit of background. The ANMF, the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation, is Australia's largest national union and professional nursing midwifery organisation. So I come to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. My role is Environmental Health Officer with the Victorian branch of the ANMF, and that represents over 94,000 nurses, midwives and personal care workers. Also representing ANMF Victoria in the meeting today is Will Betson. So he's our building manager and must be acknowledged for the legwork behind this case study. So anything that impacts on health, of course, is in our interest portfolio, and healthcare's contribution to our national emissions is calculated at 7%. That's a hefty number and we take that seriously. So today's case study is looking at energy, and there's a very important parallel that I want to draw out. Energy provision is part of our essential services. Healthcare is part of our essential services. But just because something is essential doesn't mean that it employs exemption. And perhaps there's even a higher onus on us because we are an essential service. And ANMF Victoria wants to not only support members, but to walk the talk. And that leads me to the slide that's up there today. So our CitySwitch signatory membership is taken very seriously within ANMF. It features in our environmental management plan. It's a standing item on the monthly Environment Committee agenda, and I report on it regularly to the executive. As part of this, we have committed to implementing initiatives that move us toward being carbon positive. We report on this in our annual CitySwitch report and our accredited neighbours rating. And we also have, of course, that target of switching to 100% renewable energy by 2021. So picking up on that, on our building roof, we have installed 120 solar panels capable of producing 177 kilowatts of power a day. And these receive regular checks and maintenance to make sure that we achieve as much as we can and they're performing optimally. And for the last 3 years, they've saved us about 50 tonnes of emissions annually, and it's very rewarding to see that. Effective as of the 1st of January this year, we do have a 100% renewable energy contract for our Melbourne office and any other offices that we own the contract for. And I know that that rolls off the tongue and it can sound like it's very easy. And there'll be, for some of you out there, it is very easy, but there's others of us who would have been watching that presentation with Toby, looking to learn as much as we can, asking the question, where do I begin? So energy for the newbie is a very complex space. All of a sudden, we are in a world of green energy and renewable energy. Could you just hold on for one moment? I've got my mum in the joys of presenting at home. Just started to do the dishes. So energy for the newbie can be quite complex. And all of a sudden, we end up in this world of green energy and renewable energy. Who knew there was a difference? Incinerative technology such as waste to energy or even gas being potentially marketed and labelled as renewable. Should we be looking at a PPA? And if so, there's consultant fees, partners, time issues and contract terms. And what about the offsets? Where do they fit in? And there's some really dodgy ones out there. Just because a provider has Australia in their name doesn't mean that they are Australian or Australian owned. As a union, our procurement policy's got an emphasis on Australian jobs and working conditions. We also have endorsed the claims of the school strike for climate movement, and that includes no new gas. And then we found out that the person we were looking at, the provider we were looking at, has got a 20% stake in Narrabri. So who are you going to call? For us, we called Toby, our CitySwitch manager. He couldn't choose a provider, of course, but he can provide information and answer questions such as we're giving in those slides today. And events like this are really helpful. So I'm going to be listening out and taking lots of notes when the carbon neutral people get up to speak. And heads up, Toby, they're going to turn into questions for you. Everybody wants a good punchline. So here's ours. Too good to be true can sometimes be true. Our renewable energy contract with green power is about half the cost of our previous contract. And yes, you heard that right. It's a win-win for people, planet, and profit. We are so busy with core business that we can overlook things like utilities, but there's opportunities there to reduce both emissions and expenses through our business as usual. So we save emissions, we save money, we're on track with our CitySwitch signatory commitments. Really importantly to us, we're congruent with our health priorities and our sustainability work with our members. And we've got a 6-star neighbours rating that we're really proud of. We work in health and we are so tired of sad stories for 2021. It's a real pleasure to be able to come here today and share our good news story with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ros and Toby. That was just fantastic to hear from Toby presenting those various options for signatories of different sizes to go renewable. And then I think, yeah, really fantastic, Ros, to hear your firsthand experience of how CitySwitch has supported you. Thanks for all those plugs. That was amazing. And really great to hear as well how it has saved you money and, you know, also importantly reduced emissions as well. So thanks again. And, you know, hopefully if anybody out there would like a chat with Ros, I'm sure she'd be happy to provide any further information. Danielle, it's over to you now for solution 2, going carbon neutral.
Thanks, Emily. I'll just get my screen sharing sorted out as well. Alt F5, wasn't it?
That's it.
Oops. How did I do that before? Alt.
I think you first need to share screen if
Yeah,
you haven't
probably.
pressed that yet.
Yeah, that's probably right. Screen sharing, and which one are you seeing? My scribbly screen?
It looks great, actually. We can see that.
Oh, you can see just the whole slide?
Yes.
Awesome. I've actually got it right. That's good.
Good job.
That's all right. So many different types of webinar tools. I sometimes get a bit mixed up between them. Right. Thanks very much for that. The next part of call to action that we're trying to do to help with this climate emergency is to encourage people and businesses to go carbon neutral, or at the very least to set a target to do that. Now there's a lot of variation. We're hearing a lot of net zero and a lot of going carbon neutral, and there's actually, I decided to put this slide in because there's obviously a lot of confusion, I think, around the place between, you know, what is net zero, what is carbon neutral, are they the same, are they different? And in fact, I was even asking that myself recently. So I went to the Oxford Dictionary and came up with the response, and they are pretty much the same thing. So from carbon neutral basically is where the amount of carbon dioxide produced by business or yourself, whatever it is that you're measuring, is reduced to nothing by balancing the actions that protect the environment. So it's basically between having a balance of what carbon emissions you emit into the atmosphere from the activities that you do, either as a business or personally, and what you absorb back into the atmosphere. So you basically end up with that neutral amount or net zero. If you look up what net zero's definition is in the dictionary, it's pretty much the same. It basically reads, where harmful gases produced by a particular party, company, region or country have no impact on the climate because they have been balanced by actions that protect the environment. So it's basically the same thing. So whenever you hear the term carbon neutral or net zero, you can pretty well think they're pretty much the same thing. So please don't get caught up with that, because I know it's very easy to do. So how do you do that? Well, it can be a bit of a process, but it's not as bad as everybody thinks. So the key to setting a carbon neutral target is firstly to build the business case for management. And it's worth noting there's generally no clear return on investment for going carbon neutral, depending on which way that's easily measurable in terms of dollars per dollars spent. But it usually does stack up, particularly if the organisation has any sort of idea of climate action on their radar and taking action in that realm. So setting a target, so if you can, build the business case to go carbon neutral, and you'll see the benefits of that on the next slide, so that will help you with that. And we actually do have some resources at CitySwitch, so if you want some reasons why you should do that, we can give you a bit of a one-pager, and we've also got a webinar that we can point you to shortly. Now, setting a target date, that's the key thing for us, because we know some people, you just can't say, I'm going to do that and do that straight away. Going carbon neutral does require a bit of planning. It does require a bit of budget, and it does require thinking thoroughly about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So the first thing is build the case and then set a date. And don't just set a date internally. If you can, make it public, because that will basically mean that you'll get a target date that will require agreement from senior management. Now, in small to medium organisations, they usually find this a little bit easier to do because there's less management and less approval layers to have to navigate through. But regardless of the size of the organisation, a target date, and ideally we want to set one before 2030, should be set and ideally made public. And the main reason for making it public is that if it's public, it's a little bit harder to back down and backtrack once from that commitment, once it's out there. Then it's about setting your plan and ensuring that it's included in your regular management and team meetings to maintain the profile. So, you know, it's great to hear that Ros has got that their renewable energy and their CitySwitch things included in their monthly meetings, because that keeps the profile up. And I know several other organisations that are doing similar things. They have monthly meetings, management meetings, and like OHS, this is one of the topics that they regularly discuss to see where they're going and how on track they are. So it's about getting a plan, ensuring it's included, and then maintaining the focus on that as time happens. And then it's just a matter of making it happen, allocating the budget, allocating the internal resources. And then when you do get there, do make sure you share the news and celebrate that, because it's a big achievement and it's something that a lot of stakeholders are actually looking for these days. And by stakeholders, I don't just mean, you know, investors in the company, senior management in the company. I also mean the customers of that organisation, and I also mean the workers in that organisation. It really means a lot at the moment to staff to be in a company that they hold in high regard. So regardless of your business size, there's a significant amount of benefits to doing something like this. It puts a different lens on your operations in which to focus. It contributes to the climate solution, can differentiate your business from others, shows leadership, definitely reduces costs, and meets growing stakeholder expectations. And as I said, stakeholders are a wide variety, right through from staff through to investors. Does mitigate risk, but the biggest thing, and especially from a reputational point of view, is that it really does demonstrate climate action and that your organisation takes things seriously and is actually doing something about it, not just paying lip service to it. And that's pretty important these days. So in terms of going carbon neutral, there are a couple of options, and the size of your business will likely impact which path you take, and that's usually due to costs and resource availability. So SMEs, or small to medium organisations, are more likely to utilise the self-calculate options, basically due to cost. And saying that, there are quite a lot of small to medium organisations and businesses that are now actually Climate Active certified, but it's a really good place to start. So the three options, as you can see on the slide here, is you can self-calculate and claim yourself to be carbon neutral, and you can keep that internal or you can make it public, entirely up to you. And that involves you doing your own carbon emissions calculations, basically getting your fuel information, working out what the emissions are from those, working out what your footprint might be, and then working out what offsets you would like to purchase or what projects you'd like to support to offset that, to neutralise that impact. The other option is independently calculate and claim through a third-party consultant, and there are quite a few consultant firms out there now that are doing this for businesses. The most reputable one, though, is actually the Climate Active certification. And with any of these options, if you're making any of it public, the main thing to be aware of is if you want to have if you want it to be reputable and to avoid any accusations of greenwashing, you really need to be able to substantiate what it is that you're claiming and be transparent. Now, Climate Active do that through putting out a public disclosure statement. Other businesses do that, if they're not Climate Active certified, do that by just keep putting a summary on their website or making that public to say, you know, we are carbon neutral and this is how we've done it. Those companies that don't, or that aren't transparent about what they've done and how they've done it, but are still making a claim, are likely to be accused of greenwashing at some point. So you really need to be able to substantiate this because it's a really highly valued thing. So I would like to see all organisations, particularly the larger organisations, targeting Climate Active certifications by 2030. SMEs definitely can do it too. There's a wide variety of businesses from 2 people to thousands of people certified now, and that number is growing every day. But it's definitely worth looking at. So this logo I've got here just basically gives you the image in the middle there is basically the difference in the scope. So most businesses for full certification or claiming would need to look at what's called scope 1, 2 and 3. Scope 1 and 2 are the main things. I'm not going to go into the details because we'll be here for hours if I do, but the scope 1 and 2 is basically the things that you're directly responsible for, like fuel for your company vehicles, electricity you use in your office, and so on. Scope 3 is your supply chain. So that's just something to be aware of. That's a bit of a language thing. But we do have the webinar, which runs for about 55 minutes, and the logo of it's there. If anyone wants the link to that, give me a shout, or you can probably find it through our website. But first, I wanted to introduce you to and have a look at 2 case studies that we have to talk about these things today. We've got Reho Travel, which will be first. You can give a quick summary of the key things that they've done for using independent consultants to assist with a carbon account and their claim. And they've done a great job at doing that. And they've kept that, from what I understand, quite internal and found that to be a very useful process. And then we'll follow on with Firepack, who have gone Climate Active certified. So Carsten, I'll hand over to you and look forward to hearing a bit more about Reho Travel and what you've done, because you've done a lot of amazing things over the years.
Great, thanks very much, Danny. Hi everyone, my name's Carsten Horn. I'm CEO of Reho Travel. It's pretty exciting for us at the moment because we're still in business, which is probably not a lot of travel agents have, we've all really suffered over the last 18 months. So yeah, this week is pretty exciting for us. We can feel it coming back. I noticed on the slide it says we've got 30 staff. Unfortunately that information is about 18 months old, so we're down to about 12 staff at the moment. But we're on our way back. We're the world's only travel management company that's achieved B Corp certification, which we're pretty proud of. We would prefer that there were a lot more. Our main specialisation is corporate travel for purpose-driven businesses, but we also do study tours, do about 120 study tours for universities throughout Australia. So I guess for us, being a B Corp and having been a B Corp now for nearly 7 years, it was a natural step to become carbon neutral. And straight away, it was not something we were going to do on our own because, as a travel management company, we don't encourage people to go online and book their travel. So the last thing we were going to do is try and work out, trying to be carbon neutral on our own. So we brought a consultant in. We brought in Pangol and Associates, and they kept it really simple and explained the journey and the steps to our team. And that was I think it was about 3 years ago we did that. And getting the team involved made such a difference, and champions started emerging in different areas. So a survey went out where you had to measure out, your footprint and how you got to work and everything. And some of the team really got excited about that. And they're measuring, they go, oh, maybe on Thursdays I do this, but on Wednesdays, what if I do this? What if I reduce this? And so there's a lot of talk around it during that time. And they also gave them an understanding of what they can do in other parts of their lives. So it impacted beyond just the business. And I think the key with dealing with an expert is just they break it down into simple steps. So we might have a task one week and we all follow that task, and then there's another one the next week. And it was also like, even listening from the beginning today, I had to really concentrate because it is quite complicated, all these different terms and, that you learn along the process. Even, the nice United Nations Sustainability Goals this morning, I just put ours right in front of me because I keep getting asked about them and I don't remember all of the steps. So it's something that needs to be simplified. And some of our team decided, hey, look, I'm going to start walking to work 1 or 2 days a week if I can reduce my impact, or I'll start riding my bike once or twice a week. And then also in practical terms for the team to understand that, we support our offsets go towards cooktops in Uganda, which represents our international travel. Our forests in Tasmania represents the domestic business we do. And then a lot of our study tours, Timor and Leste is actually #1 destination for study tours. So we have a Seeds in Timor program. So by choosing not just going down a generic pathway, but actually choosing customized offsets that matched the impact. I think that the team felt a lot more involved. And yeah, the interesting thing in the last 18 months is, I'm sure when we measure our impact next time round, we've probably reduced our footprint by half, because many have been working from home, or our staff numbers are reduced. So straight away my mind then goes to, that has an immediate effect on the 3 programs we have. So that's an unusual negative effect that we hadn't thought of. But yeah, look, thank you for having us part of this. And if anyone wants to get in touch on, I guess where we're experts in is just making it simple, and how engage our team. So yeah, happy for you to drop me a line. And we've done a lot of the stuff we've done, especially towards UN sustainability goals, is we have a cartoonist engaged, and everything is just simple pictures, and it just makes it much more fun. Yeah, instead of dealing with complex numbers. So yeah, thanks, and yeah, appreciate you getting in touch, Danny.
Thanks, Carsten. I've seen that cartoon picture that you've got of your SDGs, and it's absolutely amazing. I really wish I could employ that person to do some work for us. But it just really encapsulates everything that Rio Travel are doing as an organisation in terms of sustainability as a whole, and going carbon neutral is really just part of that. And you also mentioned about the offsets. There's a whole range of offsets out there, and it's a whole can of worms on its own, as I'm sure you've found out. But most businesses will support offset projects that are in line with what their business is and what their values are, and that's great, because that's what they should be supporting. But yeah, there's no reason why, if your carbon footprint says you have to buy, I don't know, 150 tonnes of carbon offsets, there's no reason why you can't buy more. So, and that's, I think we've got to find a definition for carbon positive. I reckon it's got to be 50% or 100% more, and that would be carbon positive in my view. But there's no formal definition that I've found yet. So when we find it, we'll put it out there. But thanks, Carsten. We might have to get you on to talk about your B Corp and your SDG thing actually at some point, because it's a really interesting concept of what you've done with your cartoon thing. Anyway, thanks very much, Carsten. That was great. I'll just now hand over to Lee from, is this going? Oh, there we go. From Lee from Firepack, who has gone carbon neutral. Lee is just back to work after being off for some maternity leave, and thank you so much for fitting us in, Lee, to your first few weeks back. I really appreciate that, and I'll let you talk about Firepack and how you guys have gone through the Climate Active certification.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yes, so Firepack sells compostable packaging mainly to the food service industry. We B Corp as well. And we've been carbon neutral since 2010. It's been a while. We used to use an independent certification, but in 2019, we decided to become Climate Active certified for both our organizations, so it means our office mainly, and our products. We have a lot of products. And that takes me to point number 2. It was a bit of a challenge at the beginning. So collecting all the right data. When you have lots of products and lots of suppliers, your supply chain is based in different countries and so on. It was a bit tough the first year. So it's been a steep learning curve, but it became much easier once we set up our ERP, so our system to basically spit out reports that are automated and also to capture lots of carbon-related data in the system. So everything is captured against either suppliers or products, and it makes my job much easier. So that was one of the challenges, but also it was easy to fix. It just took a little bit of time. Another challenge is the cost of offsetting our carbon footprints. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the scale, our organization is currently about 300 tons of carbon, the footprint. The footprint of our products is about 80,000 tons, so it's a lot. In the past few years, it's been quite easy to offset in terms of budget. This year, the cost of carbon's gone up a lot and is projected to go up a lot more, which is great because it means it's reflecting the actual cost of emitting carbon, but it makes budgeting a bit more complicated, especially in troubled times like these, when you have COVID and lots of other supply chain issues. So yeah, there's something to keep in mind. But there are ways of starting small, like starting with your organization, for instance. There's definitely ways around it. We think that going climate active certified was a good decision. It's a trusted certification. We love using the trademark. Our marketing team really loves it as well. We think it's improved our business reputation. It's also improved our competitiveness. It's really hard to put numbers against this, but we do see a lot of interest from customers in their tender documents. They tend more big customers, but more customers, generally speaking, are asking if we carbon neutral and if we have any certification. So it's been a great journey, and I hope we can stay carbon neutral for a long time. And thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks, Lee. That's been really helpful and terrific. Yeah, you're right about the cost of offsets. They have gone up significantly in price over the last 12 months and probably will continue to over the next few years. So just one thing from a budgeting perspective, it's really worth making a note of for things like that. It's very difficult to get product certification because I know you have to go through the whole life cycle thing, and that in itself is quite a cost. But for those organisations out there that are providing services and don't have products, it's just basically the operations of the business that gets counted underneath the certification. So it sort of helps to contain it a bit. But yeah, look, have a look. If anyone wants to know a bit more, any more detail about it, feel free to reach out to myself or to any of your program manager. And we've got the webinar, and we'll send the links out again later for that if anyone wants to see it. But I will now hand back to Emily. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Danny, and to Karsten and Lee as well for talking us through how you've got there or how you intend to get there. It's super interesting to hear from different types of business, not only how COVID has impacted, but how you continue to engage with sustainability kind of through these tricky times. And I also loved, Karsten, how you reflected in your offsets the travel part of your business as well. That was really interesting, and it sounds like a really great way to engage your team as well. We do have a couple of questions coming through, but I'll save them till after Phil has presented solution 3. But please do drop in any other questions that you have for the panelists, and we'll get to them in just a minute. So over to you, Phil, for our solution 3, which is setting up a sustainability policy and strategy.
Thanks, Emily. Let me get going. Okay, yeah, really great to hear our signatories doing some really fascinating and really exemplary work. What I wanted to talk about is how you can actually make these projects a bit easier and help them to get some legs in your organisation. And that's about having a plan. So when we talk to a lot of signatories, we find that they really struggle to get projects up and running. And that might be because other people somewhere else in the organisation are kind of going off in different directions. And it's great if you can do a lighting retrofit in the kitchen, but if the fleet manager goes and buys V6s, then you're kind of all pulling in different directions. So what we want to do is help your organisation to actually develop a plan and make this part of your actual business. There's 3 pieces I'm going to propose that you consider, but these really depend on what sector your organisation is in, whether it's government, private, whether it's big or small. I'm just going to give you some ideas today, and you're going to have to customise them or make them work for you. But we're going to talk about a framework, having a policy, and having a strategy. That is sustainability framework, sustainability policy, and sustainability strategy. Let's start with a framework. So a framework, sustainability framework, dictates what's in and out of scope when we're talking about sustainability, because really sustainability, we could be talking about anything and everything. And really, if your organisation is not doing sustainability, then you kind of have to question, what is it doing to the planet? What's it doing to people? So a framework, just like a house framework, can determine what's in and out of the design and the look of your policy and strategy. Is it going to be fancy with extra rooms? Is it just going to be something simple and practical? You don't have to create a framework from scratch. There are lots of off-the-shelf ones that you can choose from. Things like the Global Compact or One Planet Living each have 10 principles, but they're very different principles. Even neighbours can be used as a sustainability framework. But the one that's the most common and that we've already heard about today is the United Nations SDGs, which were 17 goals created by all the 193 UN member nations coming together in 2015 and setting these 17 goals to achieve by 2030. Now, business has actually kind of picked up these and run with them really well, even though you might look at them and go, oh, hang on, poverty and hunger, how does that relate to my business? And maybe it's not the priority for your business. So you don't have to choose all of them, but the SDGs are there as a compass, as a bit of a guide. You don't have to sign up to anything. You don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to report against anything. What you see there on the slide can be used as your framework. It can be as simple as that, or you can delve deeper. When we looked at the beginning of 2020 into what the ASX 200 companies were doing, the biggest 200 public companies in Australia, we found that in the annual reporting and sustainability reports, more than half of the ASX 100 were talking about the SDGs. And in fact, it seemed like the bigger and more successful you were, the more likely it was you were using the SDGs in your business. So businesses would choose on average about five SDGs to really tackle. Now, once you've got that sustainability framework established, then it's a good idea to create a policy. And this can just be a one-page document that outlines for your business what is important when it comes to sustainability for your business. A really good tool to communicate to stakeholders, shareholders, customers, financiers, tells them where you are at when it comes to sustainability. And it might include things like a policy statement, policy objectives as to what the policy does, a policy scope, so to whom and what the policy applies, key responsibilities, you might have definitions, you might have related documents in there. I would suggest that all policies have sign-off from the CEO or the most senior person in your organisation. And also version control is kind of important because sustainability is evolving at such a rapid pace these days that this should be a living document and you should keep it up to date fairly regularly. Once you've got a policy which outlines your broad objectives, you can now create a sustainability strategy. And apologies for non-sports fans, I'm going to use an AFL analogy here, but in your strategy, you're going to have goals. So the goal in a game, the footy is to win the game, but you might have other goals as well. Please our fans, move up the ladder. You're going to have targets. And in footy, the targets are pretty small, but pretty specific. You're going to have a bunch of actions. So whether it's get the vault to dusty or shut down gone or whatever it might be. You're going to have a list of actions and you're going to have some metrics. In footy, pretty easy, it's the points scored, but it could be emissions in your emissions inventory. And then you're going to have reporting. I don't know if you can see that's pointing to the scoreboard, but you're going to have a way to communicate your progress both publicly and within your organisation. So let's have a look at what this might look like on paper. And this is just a sample that I've produced that might give you an idea of what a strategy could look like. So here we have 6 goals that we've chosen, from carbon neutral operations through to partnering with others. And you can see there's links to 6 of the SDGs. On the next page, we might drill down into a bit more detail. So this is just to do with the first goal. Goal number 1, we've got our link to a framework. We've got our target, and importantly, a target date. And then we have some sort of link to the policy. So we can start using the words that were in our policy to say, this is how we're actually implementing our policy. And then we can have, maybe on a 3rd page for this particular goal, we'll have our details. So we'll have the year that we plan to take some actions, the actions that we're going to take. We can talk about our commitments. Nearly all of you will be committed to CitySwitch, but we've also heard about B Corp and neighbours. And then you can have the responsible person listed as well. And I would suggest that you use not a person's name, but their actual role, because we all know people move around both in organisations and between organisations. So that responsibility, that action can live with a position and not a person. Some things to consider when you are implementing any of these things, a policy, a strategy or a framework. Think about your organisation's drivers. They could be driven by investors or shareholders, could be driven by policy if you're in government, higher level policy than what you've got in your organisation. Could be customer expectations. There could be a social licence to operate. We want to integrate everything to do with sustainability into all parts of the business. So you've all got systems and processes that you use. Let's put sustainability into those and let's start putting in some checkpoints so we can see that people are looking to achieve the goals in the strategy and the intentions of the policy. Putting KPIs, give them to your CEO, give them to your general managers, directors, get them as high up as you can, make the organisation accountable for achieving these things. Staff education is often overlooked. We want the whole organisation to know about sustainability and why we're doing sustainability. Some of our best signatories have sustainability education programs that they have in-house. But you can also look to higher skills. So you can get people out there that have degrees in sustainability. They know a fair bit. You can have a communications plan, and that's always a good idea, along the lines that you might have with a sustainability, a social media strategy. You can align things there. Have data capture and management systems, might be capturing data from metering or surveys. Corporate reporting systems, so that you can keep the leadership informed, the decision makers informed, and work out how you're going to do public reporting. Is it going to be something in your annual report or a separate sustainability report? And finally, decide on the date, the dates for your strategy. Is it going to be a 10-year strategy, 15-year strategy, a 2030 strategy, and also how often you're going to review it and refresh it. Finally, just a warning on greenwashing. You may have heard about greenwashing where you make claims to sound like you're doing sustainability or reducing emissions, but you're not actually doing it. And this is worth pointing out because something like a 2050 target for a lot of organisations could be construed as greenwashing if you think how long and how far out that is, how many CEOs or board members you might have between now and 2050. It's really pushing that can down the road. And we are entering the age of accountability where everyone from board members to CEOs to ministers are being pulled up in front of courts to justify their actions on climate change or their lack of action on climate change. So I'm going to leave it there, but I know a lot of you will think, well, I'm not a decision maker, or I'm not in a position where I can put in a new policy or strategy or framework. But this is maybe some information where you can start planning things out and making a case higher up on how you can actually do these things and get them implemented. So I'll hand over to you again, Emily.
Thanks so much, Phil. That was brilliant. And yeah, thanks for kind of setting out those various frameworks that are already, in place that businesses can kind of, follow as a good starting point for their sustainability policy. And I don't understand AFL, but that was great. We have just a few questions that have come through the Q&A. Before I jump into them, I'd love to get a bit of a picture of who's joined us today. Just real quickly, there's a question just about to launch the poll. If you could let us know which state or territory you're joining us from today, that'd be really great for us just to understand the demographics of our CitySwitch signatories. So we've had a whole bunch still coming through there. So lots of representation from New South Wales, which is excellent. Looks like we are winning, not that it's a competition. And I might just end that poll. Thank you so much for letting us know where you are today. And the other kind of important question that I'd love for us to also hear from you on is what, I'll just have to jump to the next poll if I can. Here we go. Is what size business you represent. So kind of throughout the solutions today, we've been referring to a small, medium or large size business. It obviously, it does reflect how best you can implement the various solutions that we've been speaking to, and it's good for us to understand, what kind of resources and information to provide to the CitySwitch signatories. So a few more answers coming in there, but it looks like we have lots of large businesses on the event today. So about 52% of you are 200 plus employees. Okay, so I might end that poll. Thanks so much for doing that for us. I'll turn now to the few questions that we came in. Ali has thankfully answered some of those for us, and I think one stands out in particular, which Katie has asked, how important is it to have a dedicated staff member driving this work, and how does that get balanced with their other roles and responsibilities? Ros, I thought you might have, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I thought you might have some insights into how you kind of pick this up within the Nursing and Midwifery Federation. Did one particular person drive it, or was there a team of you, or how did it work?
I actually really like this question. Thank you for asking it. I go into two zones, two streams when I think of it. So remembering that we are an organisation representing nurses and midwives who are often driving these programs within healthcare without a sustainability officer. Like there are some, and they're a tremendous asset where they are. And, we definitely need more of them. But that's one of the problems, is that you have, little pockets of green champions running their programs, and it's not operationalised, and that can create a lot of difficulties and a lot of challenges to be overcome. And so that's one area because I always start with healthcare because, I'm working in it, and that's our bend and our focus with our members. So we're very, very aware of that. And that is why my role was created in the first place, was because we were so aware of just how hard it was for members to get the accurate information, to get the programs running and up and running, and to have a quality framework within which it could sit, and then to get the resourcing there to support it, and reinventing the wheel. Now, if I come to ANMF, yes, it does make it so much easier. So I've got a dedicated role within ANMF, and it does make it so much easier for me to be feeding in information, and it allows me to be put into situations such as what I'm sitting in today to put that. So, for example, the last climate webinar that Danielle ran, I went straight back to the Environment Committee and said, hey, this is what I've learned, and, went through it. So it's much easier for me to sit in a lot of learning situations. However, my role came into being about 7 years or something after the Environment Committee formed. And that meant that there were a lot of people within the Environment Committee running these programs themselves, and it is doable. And I think what it does is that, how much of a priority and what sort of a profile you give it within your organisation. And I think what I want to say with that, yeah, there are more complex things to do, like maybe like looking at climate active, but there's also a lot of things that we do as business as usual that we can just do a whole lot better, and we've got a responsibility to do better. The end products of procurement end up in our hands. We decide which bin it goes in. So immediately you've got a waste segregation opportunity and an education opportunity that committee can be running out without any, hobnob sitting in a meeting learning how to do it. Sure, it's handy to do it better, but there's a lot of things that we can do as business as usual if we decide that's a part of our profile and our priority.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you for just, reeling that off. That was great. So I guess you're kind of pointing to having a specific person kind of take charge and then bringing that back to the broader organisation.
I am, but remember, I also said that the committee was doing fantastic work before I even stuck my nose in there without a dedicated role, depending on the priority and profile. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we are just on time, so we'll wrap up there. Before everybody heads off, thank you so much for joining us today for our hour and 15 minutes. Sorry to anyone for which the 15 minutes was a surprise, but that should have been in the calendar. So thank you very much to Dr. Andrew King for kind of setting us up today and providing that excellent welcome and kind of context setting for us. That was amazing. And particularly thank you to our CitySwitch signatories for presenting their case studies today and really bringing these solutions to life for us. And of course, thank you to all of our CitySwitch program managers for presenting as well. That's all. If we've missed any questions, we will get back to you individually. And just as a note, as I end this meeting today, there will be a really quick survey to kind of capture what you thought of the event today, but also which direction you might take with some of these solutions. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll talk to you all again soon.